Welcome in to another edition of Inside Carolina's Next Level. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, johnnytshirt.com. Got Greg Barnes with me as always on the Next Level. We've been kind of loose doing these lately. Hadn't gotten much of them done, but we've got a special one today, and I'm going to let Greg take it away and introduce our guest.
Well, this is a big game coming up this weekend, Tommy, against Kentucky, North Carolina, of course, and this just hectic, crazy, strong non-conference slate. Of course, Florida State was thrown in there for good measure. But Ben Roberts of the Lexington Herald Leader is joining us today to talk a little bit of Kentucky basketball. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, guys.
And before we really get into this matchup, one thing that I've found interesting, and I think a lot of people have over the years, is John Calipari, when he was at Memphis, but then when he arrived at Kentucky, as well as Mike Krzyzewski at Duke, really were kind of the ringleaders of this one-and-done era in terms of bringing in as many of the elite young guys as possible and trying to have immediate success before those guys leapt to the NBA. And initially it worked. I mean, if you look at Kentucky, of course, they had, 4 out of 5 years they were in the Final Four, won the 2012 National Championship. Duke had a good bit of success. They won the 2015 National Championship with 3 freshmen in that starting lineup. But then something kind of changed. And if you look back to that game against, I guess we're not supposed to mention it, Tommy, but the Carolina-Villanova championship game back in 2016, there's a lot of veterans on the court that day. And ever since, that has been the recipe for national championship teams. I believe there have been 4 freshmen in the starting lineups of national champions since that Duke victory back in 2015. So Ben, I raised that point because we know how good Calipari is at bringing in elite talent. We also know he's kind of flirted a little bit with the transfer portal since this opened up. Is this still an approach that John Calipari is married to? He's got a lot of very talented freshmen this year. And is there any explanation for maybe why that elite success in terms of Final Fours and national championships hasn't been there for teams like Duke and Kentucky that have relied so much on one-and-done talent, over the last decade?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unbox there, and you kind of summarized my season preview story for Kentucky's season right there, all in that. And Cal and I kind of went back and forth at Media Day this year about just why he was going back to this and why he thought this would work, given all the statistics and all the trends that you just mentioned there. Part of it was, it's not that, that first 5 or 6 years, it's not that other schools weren't going after one and dones. They obviously were, but nobody was quite as all in on it as Cal was. You would see Duke, you would see some other bigger schools go after maybe 1 or 2 guys, maybe get 1, maybe get 2 in a class. 2 was rare. Cal would get 3 or 4 or 5 in a class. And when you had that much talent, he was able to kind of bring it together. He also always had at least a veteran or 2 that knew college basketball that could kind of bring those guys along. So then what you kind of get to that 2015 year, he had his 38-1 team. Duke had the Okafor, Tyus Jones, Justice Winslow, that group. And that's really where K kind of came in and started getting more of those guys in one class. And then I think kind of the bottom fell out of it, because if you, if one team can't get all those players and you kind of have to spread them around, then it's not going to be nearly as successful if you're Cal and you're trying to do that. So he still kind of kept up that to a certain extent, but he wasn't getting, frankly, as good a talent. I mean, he needed that kind of top 10 talent, it seemed like, to make that approach work. So then he goes to the transfer portal, over a 2-3 year span there, right around the time when the immediate transfer and all that happened. You get Oscar Tshiebwe's and Xavier Wheeler's and Jacob Toppin's, really good players, obviously, especially Oscar, National Player of the Year. But and they won a lot of games. I mean, they were a 2 seed that year. They lost to St. Peter's. Could have been a 1 seed very easily if a game there at the end had gone differently. But obviously the tournament success hasn't been there, and it just seemed off. They didn't seem like John Calipari teams. So now he found himself with this 23 class in a very advantageous situation where DJ Wagner coached his dad 20 years ago, had been recruiting him since middle school. That was a player he pretty much knew he could get. Aaron Bradshaw, a high school and AAU teammate of his, very close, one of the first schools on him. They thought they could get him. Reed Shepard. Both parents were stars at Kentucky, and he's an Eastern Kentucky kid. They knew they could get him. And then you add in Justin Edwards, Rob Dillingham, a couple of others. He kind of got back in a situation where, I can get 5 or 6 of these one-and-done guys. I think he likes teaching those guys. He likes those guys kind of coming in with a clean slate, not having other college basketball coaches, other college basketball experiences on their resume, and then going from there. And there are going to be bumps in the road. They lost to UNC Wilmington a couple weeks ago, 4 days after blowing Miami out of Rupp Arena. So he knew that, but he's building for March with this team. And I think, talking to a lot of Kentucky fans, this team is even with that UNCW loss has really played over the expectations, and a lot of people around here are very, very excited about this team and feel like there were a lot of questions. Like, I mean, you just mentioned there were a lot of concerns. This isn't going to work. It hasn't worked in years. Why is he doing this? Now that they're seeing it on the court, especially with guys like Tre Mitchell and Antonio Reeves, kind of a couple veterans there to help them along, people are pretty excited around here and really looking forward to this game in particular.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned some of the veteran talent with some of the younger teams. One conversation we've had about Duke being as close as they are is if you go back to that 2015 title team with, Okafor and Jones and Winslow, well, the heart and soul of that team was Quinn Cook, who was a senior. And, there were a number of talented guys that were veterans for Mike Krzyzewski where they had so much success. I mean, the Kyle Singlers and the JJ Redick, even when he was an older guy. And it just seemed like there was this period of time when there was such an effort to get so many young guys that you didn't have the growth maybe of the younger guys to become veterans, to become older guys. And you had this void. And that's kind of a theory I've stuck with. I don't know if it's true. But if you look at the 2016 and 17 North Carolina teams, I mean, those were veteran lineups. Now, of course, you can look at last year's team, which was preseason number 1, and that was top 25 in terms of D1 experience, and we know how that played out. So there's two sides of the coin, of course. But do you think there's the veteran experience on this team to be able to play that role and to settle? Because you, as you mentioned, you are going to have some up and downs, right, with this much young talent like a Wilmington game. But do you think there's enough veteran talent and leadership to be able to kind of calm the waters as you get into SEC play?
I think that's the one of the big questions with this team. And I think the addition of Tre Mitchell, which happened very, very late in the offseason and really only happened because of the Huggins situation there at West Virginia. If Bob Huggins was still the coach of West Virginia, Tre Mitchell would be there, and Kentucky would be in a lot different situation, I think, especially to start the season because they wouldn't have had anybody to play center with Bradshaw and the other 7-footers out. Antonio Reeves, 5th-year player, very good player. He's our leading scorer right now. Great 3-point shooter, but he's a quiet guy. He's a guy that if the younger guys go to ask for advice, he's certainly a team player. He'll do that, but he's not the kind of guy to go out of his way to. He's not that vocal leader. He's not really the locker room guy. He's just more of a quiet kind of laid back guy. So if that's your only senior, that could have been an issue. But Tre Mitchell came in right away. He surveyed the situation. He saw there was a void there. And he was more than willing to kind of step up and play that role. And he's been kind of the, people are already joking about the grandpa or the uncle. And he's like, I'm only 23 years old. I'm not that old. I'm not that much older than these guys, but he does play that role. And those guys lean on him both on the court and off the court, even though he's the newest player on this team. I mean, he didn't get here until June, like a couple weeks before their exhibition tournament in Canada. So he's had to really learn the situation really fast. John Calipari has taken a liking to him very quickly. So the fact that they have him, and then it also helps when you have DJ Wagner. I mean, he's 18 years old. He's the youngest guy on this team by about 4 months, I think. but he is just, and I'm sure part of it is his basketball bloodlines, his dad, just kind of where he comes from. But he's just so mature, and he's already kind of taken over. I mean, Kyle said the other day after the win over Penn that he talks like a senior. Guys follow him when he's on the court. There's this kind of edge and this will to win that isn't there when he's not on the court. And so I think when you have a freshman like that, you have a senior like Tre Mitchell, and then you've got a lot of guys who are frankly just very unselfish. Reed Shepherd. I mean, Justin Edwards was talked about as a possible number 1 NBA draft pick coming in this season, and his natural tendency is to be more of a glue guy. He's kind of the guy who dives on the floor and is fine getting 6 points and 7 rebounds if that's what the situation calls for. So I think they've got a lot of unselfish guys. It's worked so far. They've got a lot of really talented players, but they got 6 guys in double figures, 8 guys averaging about 7+ points a game. All those guys getting plenty of playing time so far. If they can keep that up, if they can stay healthy, I don't think leadership's going to be a problem. But I think it would have been a big one if Tre wasn't on this team.
We're talking with Ben Roberts of the Herald Ledger, Kentucky beat writer. Ben, one question I had, and it's interesting, since we've all covered the beat to some extent, you guys more than me, but what's that like covering these teams when there's so many young guys and they're like here today, gone tomorrow type? Because one of the fun things for me back when I used to do it all the time is getting to know players, getting to know what makes them tick, how to get them to open up and all. What's it been like covering a team like Kentucky where the guys, you barely get to know them? You talk to them for 3 months and then they're gone, 3 to 5 months, and then they're gone. From that sort of beat writer, adult interviewing, doing your job aspect of it, what's it been like for you?
Well, adult's the key word there, because you really get the difference. The last couple of years, they bring out 3 guys after every game, and a lot of times it would be Oscar Tshiebwe, Jacob Toppin, Xavier Wheeler. You're talking guys in their early 20s, getting closer to their mid-20s, guys who've been around for several years, both knew the drill from a media standpoint, but also had a lot more to say, a lot more insight, had seen a lot more, and were adults. And it was kind of a little bit of a shock when you go to media day this year, and pretty much everybody on the team's 18, 19 years old. And then you got Tre Mitchell over here, who's kind of talking like the guys the past couple years. So he's kind of been the go-to quote for everybody. But yeah, it's difficult in one sense because you do have to ask more. You need to ask differently to get more stuff out of them. But it's also kind of refreshing because they're kind of coming in wide-eyed. They don't have any preconceived notions about how any of this works. And they've all been interviewed, 5-star recruits. They've all been interviewed throughout the recruiting process. But this is all different and it's all new. And especially when they're winning and playing well, they're excited to talk. And I think a lot of media members around here, me included, probably were a little hesitant coming into the season because you knew you could go to just about anybody on the team the last couple of years and get a great quote, get great insight, depending on what was going on. And you kind of wondered going into this one if that would be the same case. But it's actually been gone pretty well so far this season. And I covered recruiting primarily for about 10 years before I jumped on the beat 2 or 3 years ago. So I was one of the few who actually did get to know these guys going back to when they were about 15 years old, because the Kentucky would usually recruit the guys who were ranked as sophomores. And then so I kind of already knew them once they got to campus. But yeah, for a lot of folks around here, you're right. You meet them for the first time in October, and then they're gone 5 months later, and you never talk to them again.
Well, I think it's important to highlight that fact right there, Ben, that you said, because with so many young guys going pro early or now with the portal transferring, the fact that you have that recruiting background and you have some of those ties, especially with this group, that pays dividends. Cheryl McMillan does recruiting for IC, does a fantastic job, but he's been a resource for when guys are actually on the team for a long time, just because of that knowledge base. But Tommy, you mentioned covering the young guys and how challenging that is. One of the interesting stories that I have throughout my career was the first year John Calipari was at Kentucky. Carolina played at Rupp Arena, and that was a year that it was DeMarcus Cousins and Eric Bledsoe and John Wall, of course, who were all freshmen. And the game was a little bit sloppy the first couple of minutes, and then John Wall, I don't know if he got a rebound or a steal, but went coast to coast for a slam. And that's probably the loudest I've ever heard a building in my life, because I kind of announced the John Calipari era. But after that game, everybody wants to talk to the young guys, of course, and even Carolina beat writers wanted to be able to talk to John Wall with his ties to the Triangle. And they bring out DeMarcus and they bring out John Wall, and it is like a feeding frenzy. It's like the Super Bowl with these young guys. And in talking with some of the Kentucky people later in the year, they're like, there's so many people who come to these games to cover these guys. You really don't have that ability to ask them the basic questions of, hey, what's working for you early in the year, to how much have you grown throughout the course of the year, because it's such big fanfare about the NBA that they're here for just a brief amount of time and then they're gone. And for me, that really kind of said, wow, this is what the one and done era is going to be like. And it wasn't like that for the duration, of course, but that was my first taste of it. And that's a good question there, Tommy, because that really took me back to that day at Rupp Arena back, 13 years ago, I guess.
Oof. John Wall, a North Carolina product. Let me ask you about about another guy that was on North Carolina's radar for a long time, and everybody watching this knows who I'm going to talk about, is Rob Dillingham. Sort of talk about him at Kentucky. It's been an interesting journey to get there. Quite frankly, never thought he'd play college basketball, but here he is at Kentucky. Here he is facing North Carolina on Saturday.
Yeah, it has been a journey, and obviously left North Carolina to go to Donda, Kanye's deal out there in California, and then went to Overtime Elite. And there were always the rumors when he was down at Overtime, he's going to go to the G League from here. He's just going to stay at Overtime for another year, and never come to Kentucky. And obviously he showed up and he's here, and he's for the most part thriving. And there's a lot of really intriguing individuals on this Kentucky basketball team, and he might be the most interesting. He's certainly near the top of the list. And I know you guys probably know his game and how he was perceived in high school. He was if you didn't care about the final score, which as a media member I did not, he was so entertaining to watch, because he could get on a heater in a hurry. He could miss 10 shots in a row in a hurry, and he would just keep shooting the ball. But the way he got separation is, as shifty and crafty as he was with the basketball, if he was playing at one of these Nike events, you felt like you couldn't go to another court because you wanted to see him. And John Calipari doesn't necessarily like that style of basketball. He likes the team game, and not that Rob wasn't a team player then, but he likes everything to flow. He doesn't like selfish shots. He doesn't like forced shots. And people were wondering what's going to happen when Rob Dillingham meets John Calipari. And, he really struggled in that international tournament in Canada. I mean, really, really struggled, to the point where some fans around here thought he wasn't going to do much at all this season. He goes in the weight room, puts on quite a bit of weight from July to September, October, comes out and scores about 40 in the blue-white game. It just does what we've seen Rob Dillingham do on the recruiting trail at times. And then since then, and there have been a couple of hiccups, but since then he has really settled down, played within himself. And when he plays within himself and plays within the natural flow of the game, he's a wizard with the basketball. He is just so good at creating space. He's so good at finding open teammates. Cal will tell you that he's still 1-2 times a game, sometimes more. The UNC Wilmington game, it was more. Tries to make the hardest possible play that there is on the court. He kind of came up with a phrase in the preseason of "stop messing with the ball." He would stop practice, pull him out of a game or an exhibition or whatever. Stop messing with the ball, Rob. Just, you're good enough. You're better than everybody else out there. Just play within the flow of the game. And when he's done that, he's been unbelievable. And you've seen him go from basically not really projected as an NBA draft pick on a lot of boards to possible lottery pick because of this. He's been leading them in assists. He's kept the turnovers down. And then, we've seen what he can do if you give him any space at all from a scoring perspective. So it's really not the Rob Dillingham I was expecting, especially this early in the season. I thought he could get there, but I was really surprised that he was able to do this so effectively this early in the season. Now, he did struggle mightily in that UNC Wilmington loss. And then he had not a good first half at all against Penn. He was 3 for 10 from the floor. I was sitting right next to the Kentucky bench at that game. There were a couple moments where Cal just turns around and it looks like his eyes are about to pop out of his head. Like, what is he doing? And then he made about 2 or 3 of those plays in a row. And finally Cal just turned around, wheels around and says, all right. And just points to Antonio Reeves, sends him in the game and puts Rob on the bench for a few minutes. But then he comes out in the second half. I think he was 3 for 4 from the field in the second half, really settled down, got back within that flow. And when he does that, especially with all the other weapons they have out there, they're really, really difficult to defend.
Such is life of a freshman. Of course, he's shooting 51.
Yes.
He's shooting 51% from 3-point range, and of course, North Carolina folks know what North Carolina recruits that go elsewhere tend to do against the Tar Heels. We'll see what happens on Saturday. We're talking with Ben Roberts, Herald Ledger, and I want to tell you about Johnny T-Shirt, JohnnyT-Shirt.com, our sponsors of this podcast. It's the 12 days of Christmas, folks. I believe today, Wednesday, they're having the sweatpants sale. This is the 12th day, one of the 12 days, and you get your sweatpants 20% off. And of course, Inside Carolina Premium subscribers get 10% off of that if you give them the code either online or in person. Also, congruityhr.com/Tar Heels for all your HR and payroll needs for your small and mid-sized business. Check out those two sponsors. They're North Carolina-based and certainly friends of all of us. Back to the show. Lexington Herald Ledger, Ben Roberts. All right, let's talk about specifically North Carolina, Kentucky on Saturday. Give North Carolina fans a bit of I don't want to say a tale for Kentucky, but this game starts how for you to expect Kentucky to play well? Not just shooting the ball well or whatever. What has to happen early for Kentucky to be on it? And then what do North Carolina fans need to be looking for to know what's coming from Kentucky?
Yeah, one interesting thing with this Kentucky team is they've started off slow in a lot of their games. And what Cal did after the Kansas game, after the loss to Kansas, is Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham, who are now both being looked at as possible NBA lottery picks, about the 17-minute mark of the first half, really no matter what's going on out on the court, he goes down there and he sends them to the scorer's table. So he's got 5 starters, but 3 minutes into the game before that first TV timeout, he's putting those 2 guys in. And I think now you're going to see Aaron Bradshaw, and that's going to be a trio. He put Bradshaw in a little later than those 2 in the first half against Penn on Saturday, and then he played so well in the first half that in the second half he put them all 3 at the same time. And I would not be surprised if he did that in the first half against Carolina. Once they all get out on the court, and what that does is, obviously Reed and Rob are very, very talented, but they're 2 very different players from whatever 2 he's going to take out, whether that's DJ Wagner and Justin Edwards, DJ Wagner, Antonio Reeves, or DJ and Adu Thoreau. It's usually one of those combinations. So it throws a totally different look at the other team. Obviously, Carolina has very good backcourt play with RJ and Elliott and some others there. So I don't know how that's going to, especially RJ, I don't know how that's going to affect somebody like that who's already seen so much. But it does give a different look for the opponent, and it brings a different energy for Kentucky. If they're already playing well, it kind of ramps it up some. If they're struggling, it kind of gives them, a little extra hope there at the beginning. But this Kentucky team, they were shooting lights out from 3-point range to start the season. Some opponents the last 2-3 games have started to kind of run them off the 3-point line, make them beat them elsewhere. Now that DJ Wagner's back healthy, I think seeing him kind of settle into the flow of the game, if he can penetrate and either make things happen at the rim himself or kick back out, that's going to be a big key. How Tre Mitchell plays, they've been able to bring him into the high post and he's 6'9", he's been their center really all season, but he's kind of the quarterback of the offense. They bring him out to the perimeter, they bring him out to the elbow, and he just kind of makes things happen from there and kind of dictates the pace from there. And then pace of play, I think, is going to be a big thing in this one because Kentucky loves to run. I know North Carolina loves to run. And I think if that becomes the game, I think Kentucky might have a little bit of an advantage there, just because I don't think Carolina can press this Kentucky team if they need to, or if they feel like they need to kind of get back in the game. I think the guards are just too quick and just too high IQ with the basketball. They don't make many turnovers at all. Up until about a week ago, they were number 1 in the country in assist to turnover ratio. I think they're still top 5 as far as fewest turnovers in the country. They don't make mistakes. Even if you try to hurry them up, they can usually take advantage of that, and everybody on this team can run the floor. So if it becomes kind of that back and forth game, I think Kentucky might have the advantage there, and they're going to want to do that. And it'll be interesting to see if they're able to do that, if Carolina lets them do that and they want to do that too, and then what happens from there at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a really good point about turnovers. Turnover percentage, Kentucky's 3rd in the country according to KenPom. So that's very impressive for so many young guys having to play. And you mentioned the press. North Carolina had success in rallying from their big deficit against Florida State, primarily because of the press. And it actually kind of frustrated UConn a little bit and allowed Carolina to hang around in that game. So that is a component certainly to watch. In watching Kentucky early this year against Kansas, that was a great game. And then Miami. Now, granted, I know Miami got blown out by Colorado recently, so that kind of tilts my opinion of them a little bit. But what Kentucky did to Miami after about the midway point of the first half was crazy impressive, not just because it highlighted the talent Kentucky has, but the fact that Kentucky had 3 7-footers on the bench with injury. And if you look at the stats, really where Kentucky struggled is in rebounding. I mean, they're 279th in offensive rebound percentage, which is crazy low. So this brings me back to Bradshaw. He's the guy that's back. He's a 7-footer, 5-star kid who doesn't really play like a 7-footer. He can run and all those kinds of things. He is back now. I know he played 20-some minutes against Penn. How big of an impact can he have, not just for this game, but kind of for Kentucky moving forward? And specifically to this game, is he going to be able to play significant minutes against Armando Bacot, or is that something that you think Mitchell is going to have to take responsibility for?
Yeah, that's the biggest question for me and the biggest matchup going into this game is I was shocked that Aaron Bradshaw played 29 minutes against Penn on Saturday. He'd been in practice for less than 2 weeks. He played 13 against UNC Wilmington and to me, he looked very lost for a lot of those 13 minutes, which is completely understandable. He had his last action in a real game it wasn't really even a real game, but was the McDonald's All-American game back in March. So he'd been out that long, had only been in a handful of practices. And then to go from 13 pretty lost minutes to 29 star minutes against Penn, I mean, he was a big difference maker in that game in a lot of different areas. I wasn't really surprised that he was able to do the things he did, but to be able to have the stamina, the conditioning after all that to play 29 was a big shocker to me. People will, see that he's 7 feet tall and think about that Armando matchup, but he's not a post-up guy, and he's not a guy who we've really seen defend the post-ups a whole lot. So if Armando goes down there and tries to back him up on the block, that's going to be really interesting. One, from a foul perspective, because I know he's been really good at drawing fouls this season, and he's been hitting free throws at a much higher rate, or quite a bit higher rate than he had been previously. That's something for me to watch. With Tre, it's a little interesting because Tre at 6'9" was their center. Their 4 was basically a Duke Thoreau, who's a 6'8" guard, or Justin Edwards, depending on who you want to call the 4 there, who's also a 6'8" guard, 6'8" wing. So Kansas, what I thought was interesting with Kansas is they had Hunter Dickinson on a do, who wasn't really much of a 3-point threat. They could get away with that and then put another physical but more mobile guy on Tre Mitchell. And I thought that was really effective what they were able to do there. Now that you have Aaron Bradshaw in the mix, and Aaron and Tre are going to play quite a bit together, assuming there's no foul trouble, that kind of takes away what opponents can kind of do with Tre. So on that end of the floor, it opens up kind of both of them. But on the other end of the floor, Ingram and Baycott are more physical than either of those guys. So I think that is where North Carolina can really have an advantage, is either just kind of backing them up, putting them both on the block, and playing off of each other, or seeing what's there on either side, trying to get one or both in foul trouble. I think that's going to be a key, is what they're really able to do if they get in that half court game, and they're able to match up with those guys. Because in a full court game, Aaron and Tre can run up and down the court all day long. Aaron's going to be a really good help defender as far as blocking shots. We saw that Saturday. But if you kind of get them settled down and get them one-on-one down there, that could be a spot where I think UNC could really have a good advantage.
Let's wrap up here in this Herald Leader, not Ledger. I blame the cold medicine, man. I am sorry for I said it twice, and Barnes is blowing me up over here, going, making me laugh. But let me ask you about. You talked about the physicality of Kentucky's bigs. Let's talk about the physicality of Kentucky's guards right fast, because I believe this is one of the weak links for North Carolina, and it's interesting to see how they sort of battle it. Is Cadeau and Davis are 6 feet, maybe. And looking at Kentucky's roster, even all the way down the roster, you got one guy that's shorter than 6'3" playing guard, and he never plays. How physical are Kentucky's guards? Do they have the post game? Can North Carolina fans expect to see what some teams have been able to do is sort of body up Davis or Cadeau and back them down? If you have guards that can do that, you can have some success against North Carolina that way. What's Kentucky like to do in that regard?
They haven't shown a ton of it, but I think in this game, if Carolina tries to switch everybody but Baycott, which it seems like they do quite a bit, and you get a Justin Edwards at 6'8" on an RJ or Elliott at 6 feet tall, they certainly have the skill and they have the ability to back them down there and to make plays down there. And Kentucky, they when they're at their best, they are moving the ball. The ball never stops. And Tre Mitchell is a big part of that. DJ Wagner is a big part of that. They just like to keep it moving. They like to make the extra pass, and that's when they're at their best. And if they can get all that motion going, get all that passing going, and get mismatches across the court, that's going to be a big deal. But even if they don't get mismatches, I mean, I think it's going to be tough for those two guys. I mean, DJ Wagner can get to the rim. Now, he's struggled finishing at the rim at times, but he can get there, and he's made pretty good decisions so far once he gets there. Reed Shepherd the same way, Rob Dillingham the same way. And they've all got 2 or 3 inches on those guys. And DJ is a strong player. He's competitive. He's not going to back down from anybody. So in that regard, I think they can kind of take advantage of that size advantage throughout the game. So that's really going to be interesting to me too, is how Carolina defends them if it does become a half-court game. Because I know they've struggled with their half-court defense. Kentucky moves the ball well enough that they can exploit that. And then when you get into those mismatches, if you have a lot of switching, I think they can really make that a big advantage on their end offensively.
Yeah, it should be an interesting ball game on Saturday, Carolina and Kentucky. It's always good when you get the Blue Bloods playing each other. We'll see another iteration of that on Saturday. Ben Roberts, I do appreciate you joining Greg and I. It's always fun to get the other quote-unquote side's perspective, because I feel like a lot of times we get in an echo chamber, and it works both ways. You get in sort of that echo chamber where everything bounces off each other and everybody gets confirmation bias and all that stuff. So it's been cool to talk to you. Enjoy your work out in Kentucky, and looking forward to maybe we'll get back together after the game and see how right or wrong we were here in this podcast.
Yeah, that sounds great.
We will give you some predictions off the air, by the way.
Okay.
And we don't want to upset any apple carts, though. I think I have a good one. But anyway, that's been Next Level with Ben Roberts. That's Greg Barnes. I'm Tommy Ashley. Johnny T-shirt and Congruity HR. Check them out. Support them. They look after us. We'll see you next time.